Hello, everybody. Greetings to all. Welcome to the Snooker Hall podcast. I'm Dan Murren, and today I'm joined by another very, very special guest. He is a WPBSA licensed snooker coach, Mr. Colin Matty. Colin, welcome to the Snooker Hall podcast.
Thank you very much for inviting me on. Good to talk.
So, who is Colin Matty? What do you do for snooker?
Well, for the last 10 years, I've been a WPBSA licensed coach, sort of working from my home address. I've got my own snooker room and, really kind of get myself involved in all aspects. I do a little bit of work with the WDBS, World Disability Billiards and Snooker. I turn out for some of the Q zones at some of the events you see on the TV, so we get the general public up and we get them on a full-size table, play a few games, do a bit of coaching. Managed to turn a hobby into a full-time job.
And you've always been a fan of snooker?
Yeah, growing up, I did the traditional, had a 6-foot table, used to just, dolly a few balls around the table, thinking I knew what I was doing. But my grandparents had, they were farmers, so they had a farmhouse, and they had a snooker table. And of course, being busy people, I would just make myself useful around the house when I wasn't pretending to help out. And I would just go and whack a few balls about on the table. I mean, bearing in mind when I was growing up as a youngster, the late 80s, early 90s, you had things like Pot Black and Big Break on the TV. So for me, seeing snooker for the first time, seeing it as a bit of fun, really, when they were, not just doing the game itself, but actually all the personalities that you saw, it was quite an exciting thing to watch. And I was good, I suppose, but as good as anybody is at that age who just picks a cue up and tries to pot a few balls. But yeah, going back from a very young age, it's something that I always tried to be good at and something that I've always had quite an interest in.
And you mentioned some personalities there. Who were your favourites when you were a youngster?
My favourites? Well, I mean, obviously I'm slightly biased, having been coached by Terry Griffiths, OBE, 1979 world champion. I've got to mention him. He is a legend of the game and a great personality. I mean, growing up, I don't want to sound like that guy, but Stephen Hendry was one of my favourite players. It's not just because everybody loves a winner. I just think he had the complete package. And I think if I'd have been younger in the 80s, I probably would have seen Steve Davis in the same light. When you talk about the players that play the game the traditional way, or how it's supposed to traditionally be played with the classic stance, the classic approach, I just think Hendry really, he sort of had it all. But when you look at it, you've got players like Dennis Taylor and Willie Thorne and John Parrott, all these people now, there's a reason why there's such a call for the nostalgia and everything else, and they turn up doing all the speaking events and everything. It's because they were the people of the time that everybody really enjoyed hearing a story from. And I just think really it was a great era of snooker, particularly to be growing up in as a young person.
As regular listeners will know, I'm a massive, massive fan of Stephen Hendry. Stephen Hendry and Ken Doherty were my favourite players growing up. But you mentioned this, some people have called it the golden age of snooker, or maybe it's slightly after the golden age, but that era with John Parrott, Willie Thorne, no longer with us, Dennis Taylor, Steve Davis, a lot more charismatic than people gave him credit for. I would say that those characters built the game, built on top of what the previous generation had laid the foundations of, people like Ray Reardon. What would you say? I mean, I suppose the game just progresses as the years and the decades go on. But Stephen Hendry, he was something special.
I mean, when it first went to BBC Two, which I think was 1969, obviously that then gets it into people's living rooms. So then you've got John Pullman, John Spencer, Ray Reardon. They were the first kind of faces. You might have known all about Joe Davis and Fred Davis and all that back in the day, but then it became those personalities were in your living room. So from what Ray and John Spencer and all the players of the 70s did into the 80s, of course, then it becomes much more mainstream. And like I say, with things like Pot Black and then latterly Big Break as well, snooker wasn't just for the snooker fan. You can now enjoy snooker from all the different aspects. And yeah, like I say, with players like Willie Thorne and Cliff Thorburn and Steve Davis, like you say, very much misunderstood as Mr. Interesting, which I think is what Spitting Image
Yep.
labelled him as. Well, actually, he did have a very good personality, and it just meant that you actually got to see that side of those players.
And how did you move into the coaching side of snooker?
I think I fell into the bracket and category that quite a lot of people fall into, which is that I was good, but I wasn't good enough. The leap from being the best in a league or the best at the amateurs and then to actually make it where you could make money out of it. It's such a huge leap, and I think every year, lots of new young people fall into that same category. But I kind of turned around to Griff and said, if I could turn this into something that I actually make a job out of, or at least to just earn a little bit of money, and there wasn't really going to be the case that, I could go out and win a few tournaments, that'll do it, that'll pay the mortgage and everything else. And he said, well, why don't you get into coaching? Now, at the time, I was 29 years old, and I thought, well, who on earth is going to go to a 29-year-old for advice about, a game such as snooker? Would my face really stand up to that? Or because bearing in mind when I had coaching, I went to a former world champion, so I thought, well, who's going to go to me? I'm a nobody. I'm not a name. And he said, well, if I show you all the different things that we've kind of gone through, all the different ways that I've taught you and all the different processes, see what you think. But if it wasn't for him specifically, I would never have done it, because I would never, I think, have had the guts to go out, sign up for one of the courses and go, yeah, do you know what? Here I am. Let me give you some of my advice. I would have thought, no, that's not going to happen. But it was his encouragement to say, well, why not? You're an affable type of chap. You know what you're talking about. You can play the game. Just pass it on. So yeah, I think for that I am ever grateful.
I suppose that's not just snooker coaching, that's like a bit of life coaching as well from, a great man in the sport.
Oh,
But,
absolutely.
kings would
And
kill for
that's
the
one of
honour.
the, yeah, sure. I mean, that was one of the things I took from having coaching with him, is how much I actually enjoyed it. It wasn't like turning up at school, where you sit there with that dread and you just think, oh, I just can't wait to get out of here. I used to go and think, if I had a 2-hour lesson, it absolutely flew by, and it was it's that level that I wanted to try and put into my own lessons. I want people to come and learn, but more importantly, I want them to come learn and then leave with a smile on their face, or at least want to come back or want to continue the process.
So you mentioned Terry Griffiths. Has there been anyone else who's been a mentor who has supported you in your career in this way?
Yeah, I mean, well, to be fair, the WPBSA, we've got the head of coaching, Chris Lovell. He's always a phone call away, so that's always nice to have. If I've got any questions or any problems, there's always that link there. I've just recently completed the level 3 advanced, which is their latest qualification. Um, it's a course that I've done. So on the course with us was Nigel Bond, obviously the former 1995 World Championship runner-up and
Yep.
British Open champion. Andrew Norman, former pro as well. I've recently met up with Michael Holt, a current
Ooh.
professional on the tour as well. We did a little bit of work together, and it's nice. I'm surrounded by the best in the world, and I just think it's got to be utilised, and that's one of the things I've also took from Griff is you never stop learning. I can remember him saying to me once, I'll probably learn something from you today, from this lesson. And I thought at the time, well, you probably won't, but it was nice of him. It was nice of him to. It was nice of him to say that, because it did make me feel $1 million. But that's the point, really. Just because I wear the shirt and just because I've got the qualification, it doesn't mean I know it all. It means I know a lot and I've studied the subject. But if I sat here now and said, well, that's it, hands in the air, the certificate's on the wall, we'll carry on as we are. Well, I just think that's a very dangerous situation to find yourself in.
So it sounds, and maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but it sounds like you enjoy the fact that the job is never complete. You can always improve, and I guess that's true with all aspects of life, really.
Oh
But
yeah, absolutely.
what is it that drives the passion for coaching in you?
I think it's the many different ways that you can teach this game, which I mean, I might be slightly biased, but I think it's the hardest game in the world. I really do. The levels of consistency you have to have and the mental strength to be really good at it, it's just endlessly fascinating. And we had on the course with a Sean Murphy, 2005 world champion. He's been there, done it, still continues to do it. And just to hear some of his stories and see some of the ways that some of the stuff that he demonstrated to us as a group, it was just fascinating to hear from his mouth how he would approach a certain situation on the table and a certain tournament and everything else. And I thought I could ask this to every single person that's ever played on the tour, and I'm sure they'd all have a different story. I met up with David Taylor, the Silver Fox, a few weeks ago. Brilliant. We went to the pub, had a good chat, went back to his, played a few frames of snooker. Wonderful. And just to kind of sit with him, I mean, he's 81 years old, but I'll tell you what, he can still knock a ball around on a table. He put a good few breaks past me, I can tell you that. But just to hear his stories of the characters of the time, and just to sort of see how he approached things when we were, playing a game of snooker, I thought, I wouldn't get that from anybody else, but that's what you get from him. That's his own experience. That's how he looks at the game. And I think that's it. I'm trying to sort of bring a little bit of everything into what I do, hopefully to try and pass some of it on.
And what is the hardest part of the job? If you had to name one aspect of coaching which is the most difficult, maybe not just for you, but in general.
Hardest part of the job? Well, I don't want this to sound too flippant, but probably standing on my feet all day. If I work from 9 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night, it plays havoc with my feet. I mean that's not a very good answer, is it? I suppose mentally you do have to kind of be aware. The thing I really enjoy about the job is that you meet lots of different people. Obviously, people from different backgrounds, they're of different abilities, but they've all kind of got that common goal. They want to get better at snooker. But obviously, the more you do in a day, I suppose the hardest part really is trying to make sure that every single person has your full attention, and I'm aware of their exact situations and everything else. So you do have to kind of take a step back from time to time and just sort of go, what am I doing now? Get my head straight, clear it and sort of go from there. So yeah, I suppose longevity would be the longness of the day, feet, mind.
And what would you say is the most common mistake that you have to correct? What is something that you notice that a lot of players do that's not helping them?
I would say the pause, and the pause is a bit subjective. Do you do it at the front? Do you do it at the back? What you're trying to do is deliver that cue as smoothly and as straight as you possibly can. So what you're trying to do around that is eliminate any other movement. So you don't want to try moving your head or moving your shoulder or moving your hips or anything else whilst playing the shot. The pause, I think, because you have to be mentally aware of it, you have to stop yourself at the back so that you can deliver that cue in one movement through the ball. It's very hard to do. And even if I wander around, set up 10 shots for somebody to play and film them doing it, they've only got to be not putting a pause in maybe once or twice. And you're kind of opening yourself up to guesswork. If you're not delivering that cue in one movement through the ball, it's very hard to be as accurate as what you're hoping to be. But likewise as well, when you say to somebody, "Oh, you forgot your pause there," they're like, "Oh, did I? Oh, I don't know." Which is why filming people is quite a good instrument for learning, because I can then rewind it back. Well, they can't deny it, then can they? They go, "Yes, you're right. That is my arm," and no, I didn't pause, did I? And it's an excellent tool for learning. I certainly remember that from when I was being coached. I had and it's hard to describe, but when I used to deliver the cue, it was almost like a bit of pizzazz at the end, just a little flick to the left. And he said in his wonderful Welsh lilt, "Well, did you know that you were doing it?" "Well, of course I didn't. I was looking at the ball, hoping that it went into the pocket." So I said, "No, I didn't." Well, of course, he then flashes it up on the big box screen TV in the corner room. "Well, that's it then. I'm bang to rights, aren't I?" "Yes, that is definitely my hand." Why I'm doing it, I don't know. I couldn't tell you. It's, in that last 0.01 second, I must have just moved my arm or moved my head. But it was a brilliant tool for putting it right, because you have that in the back of your mind and you think, that's what I'm trying to avoid. If I can see what my faults and flaws are, it makes tidying up the cue action a lot easier.
Well, I guess that's acknowledging that a problem exists is the first step towards solving the problem. And it maybe reminds me of a question that I've always had that I've never really 100% known the answer to.
Hmm.
A few pro players and other people I've spoken to have said that staying down, well, the term used is staying down on the shot. Why is that so important?
I think what you're trying to do is eliminate any unwanted movement. I mean, if you imagine that the elbow is a pendulum and you're just trying to swing the cue through it, if there's any other movement around that, once you've set yourself up on the shot and you're aiming the front of the cue and the back of the cue at the shot that you want to play, any time that you move at that point there, you're opening yourself up to guesswork. And, you could toss a coin and I could say heads or tails. You could guess correctly, theoretically, 16, 17 times in a row. It's unlikely, but it's possible. You could also guess incorrectly the first time I asked you. And that is effectively what's happening every time you move one single part of your body from that position. I mean, I can remember Steve Davis telling the story about his dad, who used to hover a cue over his head. So Steve would be down playing a shot, and just above his headline would be the butt of his dad's cue. Well, you don't want to stand up when you're about to hit your head on something wooden. So he said it was wonderful. I did hit my head on it a few times, but you soon become aware that it's there. But what it meant was, and even to this day, if you watch Steve Davis now at any of his exhibitions, or if he's on the BBC recreating a shot for the cameras, he may very well be laughing and joking with the crowd and jumping about and explaining what it is he's doing. But getting down to business, as soon as he's down on the shot, it's so ingrained in him. He's like a little statue. The only part of his body that moves is the elbow that pushes the cue in a straight line through the ball. And I suppose when we talk about the characters of the game, you've got to mention Alex Higgins. I mean, there is undeniably a character, but that's the problem. If I say to somebody now, "Oh, do me an impersonation of Alex Higgins," well, you know what's coming. They're gonna thrash the cue about and swing it round their head. Well, that wasn't really what he did, was it? He delivered the cue in a straight line at the point he was aiming at. Otherwise, he would never have potted a ball. But as soon as the tip leaves, as soon as the cue ball leaves the tip of his cue, well, he could drop the cue on the floor. It wouldn't have made any difference to the outcome of the shot. But what you're trying to do by staying down on the shot is encourage yourself to not be moving any other body parts that's going to jeopardize the accuracy.
Would you say that that's maybe something that the pros do that amateur, pub players don't do? Do you think that's a big difference? Or?
Well, yeah, I mean, if we look at the top 32, 64 players in the world, they all do different things. They all have maybe quirky habits that maybe you would look at from a coaching perspective and go, well, how does that work? I mean, famously, you could say Judd Trump. He cues ever so slightly to the side, then sort of centres his cue and pushes it through. You wouldn't teach somebody to do that, but the fact of the matter is it works. Stuart Bingham twists his wrist. When he brings a cue towards his chest, he turns it. You wouldn't tell somebody to do it. You might highlight it as a bad habit, but you wouldn't tell Stuart not to do it because it doesn't affect what actually happens when he delivers the cue through the ball. But really, staying down on the shot, it's a tricky one. I'm not about to do that. I don't want any of my students to listen to this, or perhaps any future students, and go, "Gosh, I must remember not to go for a lesson with that Colin Matty if he's going to hover a piece of wood over my head to encourage me to stay down on the shot." Absolutely, that's not the sort of thing we do. But I do think it's. I think of all the top players that you could see, the top professionals, I can't think of anyone off the top of my head who's moving about on the shot. And I sort of flippantly say that's the difference sometimes with pool. You mentioned pub players. Well, if players sort of intermittently play pool and snooker, with pool, you kind of feel like you can get away with a lot more. So maybe when that lighter ball on a smaller surface only has to go a certain distance and you only have to pop 6 or 7 balls to win a frame, are the fundamentals that important? Well, I would suggest that they are, but I also agree, yeah, you can get away with a lot more. So maybe sometimes pool and the pub can be a breeding ground for bad habits, let's be perfectly honest. But yeah, I would certainly be encouraging any of my players, billiards, pool, snooker, once you're down on that, once you've made a decision and you're down on that shot, try not to move anything else other than your elbow.
So this is a technical question, but this is also a mental question as well. I mean, both aspects of coaching are important. How do you coach mental skills?
I can remember it being put to us as, and after we'd all stopped laughing, it was put to us as arousal. Um, that's what goes on in your brain. Yeah, well, we all had a good snigger when that came up. But but what it is, you've got three states of mind. Real high arousal. For if you're on a roller coaster and you're gripping the bar and you can feel the adrenaline there, you couldn't play snooker in that state. You'd never be able to, in a relaxed manner, comfortably, accurately deliver the cue. Then at the other end of the spectrum, you've done a 14-hour day, your arms are all aching, your muscles just don't work, your focus and concentration absolutely isn't there. Well, you can't play snooker in that situation either, because you'll never be able to be accurate and keep you focused to be able to succeed. Right in the middle of that arousal, though, is where you're trying to be. Now, everybody has that middle point as something different. It could be just something as banal as, I'll just give me mum a ring. Where's my mobile phone? You're not really excited. You're not really flat. You're just sort of in the middle. There's no real. You are, to all intents and purposes, relaxed, focus, and nothing's gonna get in the way. But everybody in the world has a different way of finding that middle ground. We all know what it feels like to be on a roller coaster where you just can't do that. And we've all had a really hard day where you just think, I can barely keep my eyes open, let alone keep a cue in my hand. How we find that bit in the middle is what I'm trying to do with people on a daily basis. I always use the flippant term, just relax. It might sound daft and it's very easy for me to say, but clarity is the thing that helps you with snooker. You've got to have 100% of an idea in your head that before you play the shot, so that you can confidently play the ball. If you haven't, that could be because you're too excited and your mind's not really there, it's going at 100 mile an hour. Or it could be you're the other end and quite honestly your brain's just not working. A bit of brain fog is kind of what's hindering the process. But yeah, it's endlessly fascinating how people do get to that state in the middle. Because whenever I mention it as well, the first thing people do is go silent on me, because you never really think of it that way, do you? You never really, well, what is my thing that just gets me on? Quite happy, quite relaxed. Well, finding it is a big solution.
I spoke to Leo Scullion a few months ago, and he said, well, in his opinion, the difference between normal players and good players and the great players is the ability to focus. That level of concentration is unflappable. So I suppose he would suggest that the mental aspect of the game is equally as important as the technical. You cannot have one without the other, I guess. So maybe it's the
Absolutely.
combination of the two.
Yeah, absolutely. And particularly at that level of the game, I think it's also that level of any elite sport, though. That's what sets people aside. I mean, you can look at the greatest golfers in the world. They all play differently, but they all do the same thing to a very, very high degree. So they've all got their own ways of, perfecting accuracy. I can remember I never ever made a high break when I was counting the break in my head. I was never going 1, 8, 9, 16. Because if I did, I would never have had to focus long enough to get anywhere near 40 or 50. And obviously we live in the age of the smartphone. So something I encourage all my students to do is look, don't be counting the numbers. Look at the table. If the table's empty, well, you've made a high break. Why not record yourself? Because if you really want to know what my highest break is today, when I've done a routine or when I've done my practice, well, you can watch it back. You can also watch back for any flaws as well. Also, as well, if you happen to pull off an absolute Hollywood of a shot, well, you might want to keep it for longevity anyway. So we all enjoy those moments. But yeah, how do you keep focused? I know what is the answer. I can remember when I was playing, when I was practicing and playing, I never used to get down to a shot and think I was going to miss it. And yet one of the things I have on a daily basis, I'll get somebody that'll play a shot, they might land below the black, for example. And the first thing they say to me is, oh, I hate these shots. And I think, well, you've almost immediately missed it then, haven't you? Because in a two-man sport where your opponent is sat in the chair going, I hope he misses this, well, now that's two people against you, isn't it? It's you and your opponent. Well, it's very hard to then win the game when you've when you're your own worst enemy. But again, it's a flippant remark, isn't it? How do I say, oh, be positive? Imagine the ball going in. Yet that is what you have to do. You have to believe that every shot you play is the right one. And it all comes back to the C word again, clarity. That's really how you get a good amount of consistency in this game. You've got to be 100% in your head to be 100% on the table.
I remember, this reminds me, this was years ago, and I was watching, I'm not really a fan of it anymore, but Formula One, David Coulthard. It was Martin Brundle was saying it. It was just before his final run in qualifying, and I want to say it was at the Belgian Grand Prix. That's irrelevant, but I thought I'd add it in anyway. But you could see David in the cockpit. Is that what they call it? The cockpit in Formula One? Anyway, we'll call it the cockpit because that sounds cool. And he had his helmet on and his eyes were closed. And Martin Brundle said, what he is doing right now is he is imagining the perfect lap, where he can steal just a little bit of a corner there, just gain that slight little advantage. And the way he is imagining it, it will take the same amount of time as the actual lap itself. So it's almost like creating the image that he can try to then recreate in terms of perfection. Yeah. And that stuck with me because, and you hear, maybe they are cliches, but whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're probably right. And yeah. I suppose positivity, it can matter. And if you have faith in your ability, then you've got a chance. If you don't believe you're going to do something, maybe just that 5%, that 10% will fall away, and you fall below the threshold of success. It's.
I haven't spoken to all the professional sportsmen in the world, but I imagine that they do have an extreme level of confidence in what they're doing. You've got to have. You can't be second guessing yourself and be absolutely at the top of your game. It's just not going to happen. But you mentioned about him imagining the perfect lap. Yeah, it's success. That's what you're thinking of in Formula One. That is success. You have the perfect lap. I do a thing very early on with people. If anybody ever comes to me and they say, I'm sort of stuck on the 20-30 break mark and I'm not really getting any further, almost without exception, I will say, well, what sort of things do you practice? And they say, oh, I do the lineup. And I say, right, okay, well, the lineup's not going to make you a better snooker player, so what else do you do? Oh, well, nothing. So all I do with people is I get all of the balls out, I just put them all up the table, and I say, look, I want you to pot any ball, in any pocket, in any order. Because if you can't do that, then trying to do it in an order immediately becomes a lot harder. It's the equivalent of signing up for a 10k run if you've never run 2k. You're going to really struggle to do that 10k run. Well, you're probably going to die, but that's probably besides the point. But the thing is, what I'm getting people used to there is success. And that's what it is on a snooker table. You get down and you pot a ball. If you can do a lot of that in any order without missing, it does set off the confidence boost in your brain to go, well, do you know what? Yeah, let's just put a few balls and try and go red colour, red colour. As soon as you put all the colours on their spots and the reds up the middle, well, we know what people are trying to do. They're trying to go red colour until they've got an empty table. But it's just not possible if you're not used to that level of success. If you're not used to seeing 13, 14 balls go down in any order, it is extremely unlikely that you're going to see 13, 14 balls go down in an order and, oh, all of a sudden I'm on a 60 break. You've got to break it down. Find where the first level of success is, which on a snooker table is you hit a ball and it goes in a pocket.
So it's like swimming. You don't jump into the Pacific Ocean. You start in the shallow end of the local pool. It's a process. It's like learning a language. It's a process. Yeah, exactly. You start simple and you build it up. Yeah. You mentioned earlier that you've done some work with players who live with disability. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, this is a sport where you might think you've got to have all your limbs, you've got to have all your faculties and everything else. Absolutely not. Absolutely anybody of any age, any gender, any ability can play the game. And I would say working with the WDBS, World Disability Bleeds in Snooker, that really has opened my eyes that there are so many different aspects, not just physical, but also mental problems that people might encounter that do stop them from playing the game. But finding a solution is is ever more interesting for me. I mean, I started originally as a volunteer. We do open days. So, for example, if there's a tournament in, I don't know, Northampton, we go there quite a lot. Well, local groups, local disability groups from Northampton will come along and, in a lot of cases, for the first time ever, pick up a snooker cue and try and hit a ball. Now, for some of them, they have got a real love of snooker. They've seen it on the TV, but they've never had access to it before because maybe people have said, "It's not for you, mate. You know, you've only got one arm. Sorry about that." Well, no, actually, having one arm isn't a problem because there are gadgets and different gizmos that you are allowed to use that will help with the process. It's not just a case of writing people off because they've got autism. So what? You can still get through to people and you can still help them to play the game. It might take a bit longer. You might have to explain yourself a few things. You might have to do it in its simplest form. I don't know. There's many different ways that you can get the message across. But it's that thing of inclusivity again. You would think that there's got to be a hurdle to playing the game. One of them would be if you can't see. Well, I worked with another great coach called Steve Rutter at the Open Days, and the one that always sticks out in my mind, we had a woman who was blind. Not just could see a little bit, blind, could not see anything at all whatsoever. And yeah, the process took about 10, 12 minutes whilst we kind of got her onto the table and, she felt for the cue and she felt what the ball was like and she felt the table and position. But we got her to pot a ball. And thankfully, we got it on camera as well, because when you watch it back, you would never know that person couldn't see. It just takes a little bit of time and a little bit of manoeuvring around. But if you've got the patience and you've got the kind of mental clarity to go, right, okay, well, here's the problem. Well, this would be the logical way to solve it. So, in that instance, it's touch and feel, isn't it? If she can't see what it is she's trying to do, well, here's a cue. There's the top, there's the bottom, there's the ball. That's the table. Put your hand on the table. Now, if we stand you in this position here, and then you go through the process of how you would hit a ball, well, it doesn't matter. I could teach you with your eyes closed, and you'd still be able to do it.
Yeah, that's pretty remarkable, and it does. Well, it reminds me of in the previous episode I spoke to a snooker super fan, Rob Francis, and he was at the British Open, and he was sitting next to somebody, a blind person, and they can still enjoy snooker. The fact that the referee tells you the score, you can hear the balls, you can hear, okay, maybe the pack has been separated, or you can hear a clean contact. No, it's okay. Maybe it's a different way to enjoy it, but you can still enjoy the game.
It's a sport that can be enjoyed by anybody of any ability, of any age, of any gender. There's no reason why anybody can't do the successful part of snooker, which is potting a ball. It might take you longer to find out what that is, and you might have to introduce a gadget that you might not see in mainstream snooker. But so what? If there's a way around it, then we're going to find it. But yeah, I mean, from a coaching perspective, it's one of the best things I ever did was and continue to do. Because you meet so many different people in this job anyway, but you kind of know if somebody comes to you and they say, "Oh, I've played in my league, I'm a regular 50 breaker, but I want to make a century." Well, all right, everybody's got different ways of, maybe why they're hindered at the 50 point, but you kind of know what it is you're getting. When somebody comes to you and they say, "Oh, well, we've got Brian with us today. Brian's in a wheelchair." Well, straight away, we know that there's not going to be certain aspects of the game he's going to be able to manage, and you do have to be careful what you say to people. But it's about understanding what those needs are and then logically saying, how are they going to be able, in a comfortable way, to enjoy playing the game? And it's just endlessly fascinating with all the different people that come to me, just trying to find that way to give them the success.
There's more to it than I thought, actually. And but in terms of these gadgets that help people, and this might sound flippant, but even if you go to the bowling alley, there is what do you call it? The chute, where you can put the ball on top and it will roll. And you have the bumpers as well, so you cannot go into the gutters.
Yeah,
there's tools which help people who are just maybe have physical issues, or maybe they're just not as good. But the bumpers will help people who are not as good, and eventually they won't need the bumpers. It's a process, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the bumpers are there, and the shoot, as you call it, that's there so that everybody can go to the bowling alley and enjoy a game of bowls, or
Yeah.
ten-pin bowling, whatever you call it.
Mhm.
You wouldn't have a professional ten-pin bowling player say, "Excuse me, pal, you wouldn't mind popping the bumpers up for me, would you?" But the point is, they're there for people like me who cannot
Yeah.
ten-pin bowl to save my life. But I would go there, and I might feel a level of enjoyment if I know when I roll it down, it's not always going to go in the gutter, which is what will happen if I throw a bowl down that alley.
Yeah. I'm like you. I'm not that great at ten-pin bowling. I have a weird technique. I actually throw backhand, and people have laughed at me for this. I said, well, you don't want to see me throw the traditional way, so. But yeah. Before I let you go, a few quick fire questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
Who,
sure.
in your opinion, is the most technically proficient player on the World Snooker Tour right now?
Ooh, good question. Well, do you know, I had this question a while ago with a student who said to me, who do I think is the best player on tour right now? And I thought, well, that word is very subjective, isn't it? Because if I was building a snooker player, well, I'd have Mark Selby for his grit and and tenacity, because there's a man who never knows when he's beaten. And when you talk about mental strength, I mean, to have that amount of not giving up in you is phenomenal. Snooker brain, well, you've got to put Ronnie O'Sullivan in that category, because how he sees a shot so quickly, how he makes the game look ridiculously easy. I'd say that's unfaulted, really. Then temperament, well, you've got to have Stephen Hendry. I mean, you'd see him sat in his chair. Did you know if he was 6-0 up or 6-0 down? No, not usually, because he had the same expression on his face. He never got flustered. I suppose, really, you could throw Mark Williams into that argument as well. I mean, there's a man who does not take snooker too seriously. And absolutely, I would say that's the right approach. His way of saying, oh, you've got so and so in the next round, Mark. He'll say, well, I don't care. It's another game of snooker, isn't it? If I want to win, I've got to beat everyone else. So does it matter? And then cue action. Well, again, do we look at maybe go back a bit and say Steve Davis? I mean, there was a reliable cue action if ever there was one. But look at a lot of the modern players. I mean, a lot of the delivery of a cue nowadays, it's so well sort of structured. You could throw so many players into the argument. I think it'd be unfair to pick one over another.
And in terms of the youngsters, do you think the future of snooker is bright? So I've mentioned a few times, eventually we will have to move on from this focus on the class of 92. And I think we will have to focus on a new generation soon. Do you feel that snooker is in a good place to move on at some point soon?
Yeah, I do. It's understandable why, when you've got John Higgins and Ronnie O'Sullivan and that's playing so well into that. I mean, they're both late 40s. So you think, well, maybe should they have given up now? Well, of course not. Everybody enjoy. If you buy a ticket to an event, you hear people going, "Oh, which table's Ronnie on?" Or, "Do you know when Mark Williams is playing, mate?" Of course, that is that level of nostalgia that we've got now. These players are still playing. We want to enjoy them. I went to an exhibition a few months ago with Liam Davis. I think he's 18 years old. He's a young Welsh lad. And honestly, I was blown away. Not just because he's brilliant. I knew he was going to be brilliant. He's a professional snooker player. He's not there because he won a raffle. He can play the game. What I was most impressed with was just his temperament and the way that he talked to people. For such a young man, I thought, you're going to go a long way in this sport, because it didn't matter what people were doing. What was it, the best table he was playing on? Was it, the usual professional surroundings? Of course it wasn't. But for an 18-year-old man, I thought the way he handled that situation, he won every frame that night, by the way, I should just add as well. But I was just sat there looking at him and I thought, if there's more players like you coming through, we're absolutely safe as houses. Because I think he really represents what we hope snooker will become in years to come. So, yeah, there you go. Little plug for Liam Davis. I think he's absolutely going to be a star of the future.
Colin, I wanted to say thanks for your time. I really appreciate the insight you've given us into quite a few aspects of the game, a few aspects which maybe don't get as much attention as they deserve, as they should. So thank you for your time. Where can people get in contact with you if they're interested in some coaching?
If they're interested in coaching from myself, I've got a website. So it's colinmattysnookercoaching.com. You'll see my friendly face there on the front screen. I'm on Facebook as well, so it's Colin Matty or Colin Matty Snooker Coaching. That sort of shows my whereabouts and the sort of things I get up to, and there's pictures of me at events and with a few people you might recognise and all the rest of it. So yeah, Google is your friend, or Facebook.
As always, thank you very much for your time, and hopefully you'll come back and speak to me again in the future.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me on.
Thank you again to Colin Matty for joining me on the Snooker Hall podcast. A wonderful guest, and I appreciate him sharing some of his knowledge with us. On a more somber note, it's been more than a week now since we heard that Clive Everton has passed away. I started watching snooker in the mid-90s, and the voices I remember hearing when I first watched were those of Dennis Taylor, Ted Lowe, and Clive Everton. 3 different voices, 3 different accents too. Now, for people of a certain age, there are voices that one associates with a particular sport. I'm in my late 30s now, and maybe it's due to when I started watching these sports, but in terms of iconic, unique, instantly recognizable voices, for football, I think of John Motson. For golf, I think of Peter Allis. For Formula One, it's Murray Walker. But for snooker, even more than Ted Lowe, it is Clive Everton. And it's sad to say that none of those men are with us anymore. Yes, life goes on, but those men were instrumental in bringing the sport to the people. And for me, on a personal note, it is kind of the end of an era in terms of sports commentary. I listened to Dave Hendon's tribute to Clive on the Snooker Scene podcast, and it was really interesting to hear from someone who knew Clive well. That man did a lot for snooker. During the British Open, it was nice to see a moment of silence in Clive's honour to mourn his passing, but I was happy to see a round of applause too, to celebrate his contribution to this sport and to our culture, really. Seeing the Clive Everton trophy front and centre during those few moments, that was a really nice touch, but he would want the show to go on. We can look back fondly on what he did for the sport and what he did for snooker fans, and we will not soon forget Clive Everton. That is it for today. As I always say, I really appreciate the support that the podcast has received. Thank you for checking it out. Thank you for listening. A 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and a 5-star rating on Spotify would go a long way to helping other snooker fans discover the Snooker Hall podcast. The show did hit a very special milestone last week. The Snooker Hall podcast now has listeners in 50 countries. A very warm welcome to new members of the Snooker Hall community in Singapore, Cyprus, and the Philippines. The Wuhan Open is underway. I'll be back next week with some analysis of that event. I'm excited to see how the latter stages unfold in China. I hope you enjoy watching the action in Wuhan. But until next time, take care.